Imagine waking up one day to a silence so profound it is louder than any noise you have ever heard. It's not the silence of a quiet room or a sleeping city. It is the internal silence that arrives when the background music of your life, the hum of ambition, the rhythm of routine, the melody of meaning abruptly cuts out. You go through the motions. You drink your coffee, you attend your meetings, you exchange pleasantries. But it all feels like a performance in an empty theater. The props of purpose, the career ladder you're climbing, the relationships you're building, the legacy you're crafting are suddenly revealed as painted cardboard. You can see the stagehands in the wings, the dust on the rafters. The grand narrative of your life, the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and where you're going, has lost its plot. The protagonist has forgotten his lines and the script has dissolved into incoherent scribbles. This is not depression, though it may wear its clothes. Depression is a cloud that obscures the sun, making everything gray and cold. This is different. This is a clear, bright, and merciless day where the sun itself has been extinguished. You see the world with a terrifying surgical clarity. You see the frantic, almost comic busyness of the people around you, building their sandcastles just before the tide comes in. You hear the hollow ring of their triumphs and the whispered anxiety beneath their laughter. And the most unsettling part? You can't unsee it. You have, without your consent, been handed a key to a room you never wanted to enter. The room where all meaning is negotiable, all value is assigned, and nothing is inherently, divinely true. This is the anteroom of nihilism, not the cartoonish nihilism of chaos and destruction, but the profound, philosophical nihilism that stares into the abyss of a universe without preordained purpose. It is the terrifying realization that the gods are dead, the cosmic order is a human fiction, and the weight of existence rests entirely on your own, unbearably fragile shoulders. What do you do in that room? Do you try to flee? To scramble back into the comforting noise of the crowd, to plaster over the silence with louder music and more fervent belief? Do you let the sheer weight of it crush you, collapsing into a paralysis of why bother? Or do you, against every instinct for self-preservation, take a step closer to the edge and peer down? The 20th century Romanian philosopher Emil Cioran did not just peer into this abyss. He set up a home there. He is the poet of our terminal insomnia, the bard of decay. His work is a long, sustained, and strangely lyrical meditation on the futility of everything. He writes, "It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late." And yet this man, who wrestled with insomnia and thoughts of suicide his entire life, never did take his own life. Instead, he wrote with a feverish, corrosive, and darkly comic brilliance for decades. This is the paradox that claws at the soul. How can someone who saw so clearly the void at the center of things not only continue to exist but produce works of stunning beauty and intellectual ferocity? How can the most radical acknowledgement of meaninglessness become a source of not just endurance, but a strange, defiant kind of creation? If all is truly for nothing, then why write? Why think? Why love? Why get out of bed in the morning? The conventional answers for happiness, for success, for others, crumble to dust in this clear, thin air. They are sandcastles, and the tide is always coming in. So what remains? What action? What thought? What stance towards existence could possibly be valid when the very foundation of validity has been swept away? This is not an abstract philosophical puzzle. This is the great unspoken question that haunts the edges of our most quiet moments. It is the question that rises in the wake of personal failure, in the face of global catastrophe, in the stillness of a life that has, by all external accounts, succeeded, yet feels like a beautifully decorated void. We have been taught to avoid this question, to treat it as a pathology to be cured with medication, mindfulness, or consumerism. But what if the avoidance is the true sickness? And what if, hidden within the terrifying heart of this nothingness lies not a curse but a key? a key to a form of freedom so radical and so terrifying that we scarcely have a word for it. The answer does not lie in building a better sandcastle. It lies in learning to love the tide. The problem is not the silence itself. The problem is our lifelong, desperate, and meticulously conditioned flight from it. We are not equipped to handle the void because our entire civilization is a monument to its denial. From the moment we are born, we are swaddled in ready-made meanings. We are handed identities, son, daughter, student, professional, citizen, and inscribed into narratives of progress, salvation, and legacy. We are taught to want, to achieve, to believe, to belong. These are not just social contracts. They are psychological life rafts, and we cling to them with the desperation of the shipwrecked. This is the first layer of the hidden problem. What the French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith. It is the act of lying to oneself to escape the agonizing burden of freedom. To confront the genuine emptiness of the cosmos is to accept that you are utterly, terrifyingly free. There is no divine plan, no inherent human nature, no cosmic scorecard. You are condemned to invent yourself with every choice you make. This freedom is so immense, so dizzying, that most of us immediately surrender it. We prefer to see ourselves as fixed entities, as a waiter or a father or a good person, because these roles come with scripts. They tell us how to behave, what to want, what to fear. We become the roles, and in doing so, we anesthetize ourselves to the underlying truth. We trade the terrifying freedom of the void for the comfortable prison of a pre-written life. But what happens when the prison walls begin to crumble? When through tragedy, disillusionment, or simply a moment of piercing clarity, the script fails? This is where the second, deeper layer of the problem emerges. A layer where Cioran builds his home. For him, the crisis of meaning is not a philosophical error to be corrected, but the fundamental raw condition of existence. He drags us beyond Sartre's bad faith into a more brutal landscape. He draws from the wellspring of Arthur Schopenhauer, who saw the universe not as a rational order but as a blind, purposeless, and eternally striving will. For Schopenhauer, this will, this incessant driving force of desire, is the source of all suffering. We are desire machines, and the fulfillment of desire is only ever a temporary cessation of pain, a brief respite before the next want emerges. Life, therefore, is a constant oscillation between the agony of lack and the boredom of satisfaction. Our cherished projects, our loves, our ambitions are merely the elaborate, self-deceiving costumes that this blind will wears to perpetuate itself. To see this is to see the engine of suffering itself. Cioran takes this bleak inheritance and pushes it to its logical, lyrical extreme. He agrees that consciousness is a mistake, an accident of evolution, a tumor on the universe. How can we sleep, he asks, when our very existence is an open wound? He saw history not as a march of progress but as a succession of convulsions, a tale told by an idiot, signifying nothing but blood and folly. While other thinkers sought ways to overcome nihilism, to find a new God, a new morality, a new humanism, Cioran rejected the very premise. For him, nihilism is not a problem to be solved. It is the truth to be endured. Any system that tries to build meaning on top of this void is just another form of self-deception, another sin against truth. This is the psychological trap he exposes. We are caught between two unbearable poles, the Scylla of a meaningless existence and the Charybdis of meaningless consolations. We can either face the void and be paralyzed by its truth, or we can flee into comforting lies and live in bad faith. This is the intellectual and spiritual torture that defines the modern condition. We are too intelligent to believe in the old gods and too fragile to live without any. Our society, in what Cioran would see as a final comic spasm of this avoidance, offers a supermarket of anesthetics. The distracted life that the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard warned of has become our default mode. We have an entire economy built on the pursuit of happiness, a frantic chase for dopamine hits through consumption, validation, and experience. We are encouraged to find our passion, to live our truth, to manifest our destiny. All desperate attempts to project a subjective meaning onto a universe that remains supremely, chillingly indifferent. We medicate the symptoms of the existential condition without ever diagnosing the disease. We try to fill Cioran's silence with podcasts. We try to illuminate his abyss with the glow of a smartphone, and it works for a time. But the silence always returns louder and more demanding than before. The hidden problem then is not nihilism. The hidden problem is our refusal to admit that we are already living in its shadow, and that all our efforts to escape are only digging us deeper into the trap. We are like a man trying to outrun his own shadow at noon. But what if there is a way to stop running? What if the very act of fully admitting the truth, of staring into the void without blinking, contains the seed of its own strange salvation? The consequences of refusing this are not merely personal despair. They are woven into the very fabric of our collapsing world. The refusal to stare into the abyss does not make the abyss disappear. It only makes us its unwitting puppets. The unacknowledged void does not vanish. It metastasizes. It seeps into the cracks of our personalities, distorts our institutions, and poisons our collective spirit. It manifests not as a philosophical stance, but as a low-grade, chronic fever in the soul of society, a sickness we have learned to call by other names. Anxiety, burnout, cynicism, rage. On a personal level, the consequence is a life lived in a state of quiet desperation, punctuated by frantic euphoria. This is the world Aldous Huxley prophesied in Brave New World, where we are enslaved not by pain, but by pleasure. We are conditioned to seek happiness as a permanent state, a final solution to the problem of being. But this pursuit is a ghost chase. When you believe the universe is meaningless but lack the courage to admit it, your desires become unmoored and frantic. You scroll through endless feeds, seeking a hit of novelty, a flicker of validation. You acquire objects, titles, and experiences not for their intrinsic value, but as talismans to ward off the creeping suspicion of your own insignificance. You become a consumer of your own life, a tourist in your own existence. This creates a bizarre psychological phenomenon, the performance of meaning. We don the mask of the fulfilled professional, the dedicated parent, the enlightened seeker. We curate our lives for an audience, real or imagined, hoping that the applause will convince us that the show is worthwhile. But behind the mask, the self becomes hollow, an echo chamber of borrowed desires and market-tested aspirations. This is the ultimate triumph of bad faith. We are not even lying to others anymore so much as we are lying to ourselves. And we are so proficient at it we no longer recognize the deceit. The consequence is a profound sense of inauthenticity, a feeling that you are a ghost in your own machine, going through motions designed by forces you cannot name. This personal dissonance scales into a collective sickness. A society that has exiled death, doubt, and despair from its official narrative is a society with no immune system against tragedy. When suffering inevitably comes, loss, failure, crisis, it is not seen as a part of the human condition, but as a personal failing, a glitch in the system. We pathologize grief. We medicalize melancholy. We demand resilience not as a philosophical strength, but as a functional necessity to keep the economic engine humming. This leads to what the sociologist Emil Durkheim called anomie, a state of normlessness, where the old rules have collapsed and no new ones have taken their place that feel real. We see its effects everywhere. In the brittle tribalism of our politics where frantic belief substitutes for genuine conviction. In the culture of outrage where moral certainty is a desperate performance to fill the vacuum of true moral grounding. In the rampant conspiracy theories, which provide a dark, intricate, and comforting narrative in a world that otherwise seems random and absurd. These are not the actions of people who have found meaning. They are the convulsions of people trying to simulate meaning, to build a bonfire of certainty to hold back the infinite, cold dark. Even our attempts at mindfulness and self-care can become subtle instruments of this evasion. We are taught to sit with our anxiety, to observe our thoughts, to breathe through our stress. But too often, the unspoken goal is not to understand the fundamental nature of our suffering, but to optimize ourselves back into productivity, to become better, happier, more efficient cogs in the very machine that is making us sick. We are treating the burn while keeping our hand on the stove. We are trying to cure a spiritual cancer with a band-aid of calm. Cioran saw this with terrifying clarity. He wrote, "Civilization is a forest of lies, a vegetation of evasion. We have built the most spectacular forest the world has ever seen. Our cities are cathedrals of commerce. Our networks are webs of global connection. Our medicine can defeat ancient plagues. Yet we are more isolated, more anxious, more fragile than ever. Why? Because the foundation is rotten. The lies are wearing thin. The frantic, cheerful, consumerist optimism of our age is the flip side of a deep, unspoken despair. It is the manic laughter that covers a sob. The unseen consequence of our flight from the void is that we have become ghosts haunting our own lives, building glittering cities on a foundation of sand, and wondering why we constantly feel the ground shifting beneath our feet. The abyss is not in front of us. It is within us, and it is projecting itself onto our world. But what if this diagnosis, as grim as it is not the end? What if this total collapse of external meaning is not a prison sentence, but the necessary demolition that must occur before we can build something authentic? What if the only way out is paradoxically deeper in? The rebellion does not begin with a manifesto or a march. It begins with a single heretical act, the decision to stop running, to turn around, face the pursuing shadow, and finally acknowledge that it is your own. This is the Cioranian pivot. It is not an ascent toward the light, but a conscious, willful descent into the cellar of the self to sit with the darkness until your eyes adjust. The first and most radical step is to stop seeking meaning. All seeking is born of lack, a frantic grasping for an external solution. It is the final, most tenacious form of bad faith. Cioran's rebellion is to abandon the search entirely. He does not offer a new belief system to replace the old ones. He offers a method of unbelief so total that it becomes a form of asceticism. You must, he suggests, systematically strip away every consolation, every should, every borrowed hope. You must become a connoisseur of your own despair, to sip it slowly, to learn its vintage and its subtleties. This is the counterintuitive heart of the solution. You must embrace the futility, not as a conclusion that paralyzes, but as a ground that liberates. How does one do this? It begins with what the psychologist Carl Jung might call a confrontation with the shadow, but pushed to its absolute limit. It is to look at the wreckage of your ambitions, the absurdity of your griefs, the comic fragility of your body, and not look away. It is to admit, fully and without reservation, that you are born from chaos, that you are riddled with contradictions, that your consciousness is a flickering anomaly in an indifferent universe, and that you will die and be forgotten. This is not a one-time intellectual acknowledgement. It is a daily practice, a form of meditation on the grotesque and the futile. This is where Cioran diverges from the existentialists. Sartre said we are condemned to be free, and must therefore invent our values through authentic projects. Cioran finds this too earnest, too constructive. For him, the rebellion is not about inventing meaning, but about disarming it. It is to realize that the question, what is the meaning of life, is itself the trap. The moment you ask it, you are already lost, presupposing that meaning is something to be found like a lost key. The rebellion is to drop the question, and from this scorched earth a strange and terrible freedom begins to sprout. If nothing matters, then everything is permitted. But this is not the everything of the libertine or the criminal. That is just another form of slavery to desire. The true permission is far more profound, the permission to fail, the permission to be insignificant, the permission to not have a purpose, the permission to be a mess, a contradiction, a fleeting moment of awareness in an eternal night. When you grant yourself this permission, the props of your performed identity begin to lose their power over you. The fear of social judgment softens. What is the opinion of other ghosts in the grand cemetery of existence? The agony of professional failure lessons. What is a missed promotion in the context of galactic time? The need for constant validation evaporates. You are no longer trying to fill the inner void with the applause of the crowd. You are free from the tyranny of success and happiness. You are free to engage with the world not because you need it to give you meaning, but out of a sense of gratuitous, absurd play. This is the gateway to Cioran's most vital concept, the philosophy of the acte gratuit, or the gratuitous act. An act done for no reason whatsoever, not for profit, not for glory, not for moral approval, not even for personal satisfaction. An act performed purely for the sake of its own energy, its own aesthetic shape in the void. For Cioran, writing itself was such an act. He did not write to convince, to save, or to be remembered. He wrote because he was an epileptic of eternity, because the energy of despair demanded an outlet. The writing was not a message in a bottle. It was the convulsion itself, transformed into style. Your life then becomes a potential canvas for such gratuitous acts, a kindness extended with no expectation of reward, a piece of art created with no concern for an audience, a project pursued not for its outcome, but for the sheer intensity of the engagement. This is not creating your own meaning. That is too heavy, too self-important. This is lighter. It is imposing form on the formless, not because you must, but because you can. It is a dance at the edge of the abyss. The dance does not fill the abyss. It does not explain it. It does not defeat it. It simply acknowledges it, and in that acknowledgement finds a fleeting, beautiful, and perfectly valid reason to move. The rebellion is not a victory over nihilism. It is a collaboration with it. You stop fighting the truth of the void and instead learn to use its emptiness as your medium. But this raises a final terrifying question. If the dance is enough, what does that make you? What are you when you are no longer a seeker but a dancer in the dark? You are not the dancer. This is the ultimate seismic revelation. The you that you have spent a lifetime constructing, the collection of memories, desires, regrets, and roles, the ego that seeks meaning and fears oblivion, that you is just another temporary formation, a complex edifice built over the abyss. It is the dancer, and like all dancers, its performance is fleeting. The rebellion of the gratuitous act was a necessary, glorious stage, but it still contained a final, almost invisible residue of the self. It still posited a you who chooses to dance. The final realization is that the abyss is not outside of you. It is you. When Cioran writes, "I am an accident of evolution, a fortuitous and monstrous conjunction of atoms," he is not just being melodramatic. He is pointing toward a depersonalization of consciousness, a shattering of the individual prison. The I that suffers, the I that feels futile, is the very problem. The ultimate freedom is not the freedom of the self, but freedom from the self. Think of your mind as a radio. For your entire life you have believed you were the radio, the plastic casing, the wires, the speaker. You have identified with the static, the particular station that is playing, your personality, and the dramas of the songs, your life. The suffering of nihilism is the moment you realize the songs are meaningless, and the radio will eventually break. The rebellion is to choose to play your own song loudly and defiantly before the silence comes. But the final truth is the realization that you are not the radio. You are the silent, open space in which the radio temporarily exists. You are the awareness that hears the music, the static, and the eventual silence without being any of them. The abyss is not a threat to this awareness. It is its native state. This is the profound non-dual insight that lurks in the heart of the darkest pessimism. The universe's indifference is not a verdict upon you. It is your own original face, before you were born and after you die. From this vantage point, the entire exhausting project of the self, its striving, its anxiety, its desperate search for validation and meaning, is revealed as a fascinating, tragic, and ultimately comic performance. It is a game you have been playing with yourself, and you forgot you were playing. Cioran's relentless negativity was a tool to smash the game board. He sought to exhaust the ego, to tire it out through relentless introspection until it has no more arguments, no more consolations, no more energy to defend its own fictional importance. In that exhaustion, that post-human state as he sometimes called it, something else can emerge. This is the creative salvation promised in the title. It is not salvation through creativity, as if writing a poem or painting a picture will save your soul. It is the realization that your fundamental nature is creative, impersonal awareness. When the noisy, grasping ego is silenced, even for a moment, what expresses itself through you is no longer a personal confession, but a cosmic impulse. The writer who writes from this void is not expressing his personal despair. He is channeling despair itself. The artist who paints from this ground is not illustrating his dreams. He is giving form to the formless. The work of art becomes not a self-expression, but a world expression. It has the chilling beauty and the terrible impartiality of a glacier or a galaxy. This is why Cioran, the man who believed in nothing, could write with more vitality and stylistic ferocity than the most fervent believer. His writing was not about despair. It was despair crystallized into aphorism. It was the void, speaking its own name. He did not use language to communicate. He used it as an incantation to invoke the real. In doing so, he achieved the greatest paradox. He made futility sing. Your life, then, is not a problem to be solved. It is a phenomenon to be witnessed. The pain, the joy, the love, the loss, they are all weather patterns in the vast empty sky of your awareness. You do not need to heal yourself. You need to see that the self that needs healing is a phantom. You do not need to find your purpose. You need to see that the seeker of purpose is the only thing standing in the way of the purposeless, radiant and constant unfolding of what is. So do not seek to be the hero who conquers the abyss or the rebel who dances on its edge. Let the abyss conquer you. Let it dissolve you. Surrender the frantic, fragile project of being someone. In that utter, terrifying, and final surrender, a great peace descends. It is the peace of the ruins after the city has fallen. The sun still rises. The wind still blows through the broken arches. The silence is no longer a threat, but a homecoming. You look at your hands, and you see not your hands, but life, expressing itself as hands. You feel a sorrow, and you see not your sorrow, but the ancient, universal tide of suffering passing through you. You experience a moment of joy, and it is the joy of existence itself, momentarily free from the storyteller. This is the end of the search. This is the meaning of meaninglessness. It is not an answer, but the dissolution of the question. You are free not because you have found what you were looking for, but because you have finally, blessedly stopped looking. You are here. You are now, and it is and has always been enough.